Welcome to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where we sit down with the people who give shape, texture, and voice to the stories that matter here on the North Fork of Long Island and sometimes far beyond. Some of our guests are rooted here by generations. Others join us from elsewhere to share their work, their perspective, or their connection to this community. But all bring something that resonates, something that adds to the ongoing conversation. We talk about what's changing, what's worth holding on to, and the currents of history, both quiet and loud, that run through this place. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 184, we sit down with Felix Grucci Jr., former U.S. Congressman for New York's 1st Congressional District, a lifelong Long Islander and fifth-generation member of the famed Grucci family. Felix grew up in a world of color, light, and precision at the helm of one of America's most celebrated family businesses, Fireworks by Grucci. Under his leadership, the company produced landmark displays for the presidential inaugurations, Olympic Games, and countless national celebrations, carrying the family tradition to a global stage. Before his election to Congress, Felix served as Brookhaven Town Supervisor, where he brought his business experience to local government. In Washington, he represented Suffolk County during a particularly turbulent period following September 11th, working on behalf of the region deeply affected by national and economic change. In this conversation, we talk about the origins of his family's remarkable business, his transition from private to the public sector, the challenges and rewards of leadership in both worlds, and his reflection on how Suffolk County has evolved and where it's headed next. So I hope you enjoy episode 184 with Felix Grucci Jr. This episode was recorded July 11th, 2025. Thank you so much for coming on the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today. It's really great to have you on today.
Well, thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be with you.
Thank you. And to start off, if you could give us a little bit of a brief introduction about yourself.
Sure. My name is Felix Grucci Jr., and I'm a fifth generation Grucci in the United States. My family is best known for its work in the area of pyrotechnics. We were Fireworks by Grucci, and it still are Fireworks by Grucci. I am retired now, but my nephew is the owner of the business and runs the company. And I'm 73 years old. I've been involved in both public service and in the private sector. I was the president of Fireworks by Grucci and the comptroller for Pyrotechnique by Grucci, which was our military pyrotechnic line. And I also have been involved in community service in the form of an elected official in the town of Brookhaven. I was once the Zoning Board of Appeals chairman. I served on the town board as a councilman. I succeeded that position as the supervisor of the town of Brookhaven for several years, and then went on to Congress for a term, and then retired out of Congress and went back into local community service, servicing my parish as the finance chairman for Mary Immaculate Roman Catholic Church. I was also a trustee in that and served on the then Brookhaven Hospital Board of Directors, which is now New York Langone. And I have a full life.
Yes, that's impressive. But if we can go back in terms of your family's history, even with fireworks, can you take us back to the origins of your ancestry and how they first became involved in pyrotechnics?
Well, I can bring you back to when the family came to America. We know that the firework business was in the family while my ancestors still resided in Italy. The firework business didn't start on the Grucci side of the family. It started on my dad's mom's side of the family, which was the Lanzettas. They had a fireworks business in Italy, and around the turn of the last century, they migrated to this country, as did so many immigrants from Europe and specifically from Italy, and brought with them the trade, their craft. And the business of fireworks grew in this country for over 100 years. My dad succeeded my great uncle, who was his uncle, my grandmother's brother, and he became my dad. That is, became an owner of his own firework business, and as a result of a horrific explosion back in the early 30s, my great uncle uh, passed in that explosion, as did his son, wiping out that side of the family's firework liturgy. And the what remained was my dad and his business, and it's progressed ever since then until we've now become an international fireworks company.
Hmm. But in Italy, they were always, at least from what you know, they were always interested in pyrotechnics over
Yes, on
there.
my grandmother's side of the family, the Lanzetta side of the family, we know that there's a history of them being in the firework business in Italy. We've tried to trace that, but we've drawn blanks on a number of occasions. And in fact, some of my family has gone to Italy and tried to, trace back our ancestry. But for whatever reason, the Lanzetta side of the family seems to have disappeared from the records of businesses and where they lived. We know that my mom's side of the family, they came from Abilene, kind of the mountainous region in Italy, and my dad's side of the family came from Naples or either Naples or Bari. I keep getting
Okay.
confused.
Uh, and did they talk about just, was it hard in the beginning getting started, making a business here and getting a name for themselves in the US?
Forming the business was not as difficult as trying to form a business is today. As you can imagine, back in the turn of the last century, there wasn't the kind of rules and regulations and oversight that there is today. So starting up the business was an easy thing to do. Getting a business off the ground was a much more difficult thing to do because my ancestors weren't the only ones who brought the craft of fireworks over to this country, along with a number of other families that were in the firework business in Italy, also migrated to America, coming through the Ellis Island Statue of Liberty experience. Some settled in uh, New Jersey, some settled
Hmm.
in what is now Nassau in Queens, which at that time was just vacant open property.
Hmm.
And my ancestors came all the way out then. It was considered all the way out into the country into East Patchogue, Long Island. And so getting a foothold in the industry was difficult because in those days it wasn't a type of a business that you can go out and sell to a client and build up a client relationship and have a repeat set of businesses. Most of the fireworks shows in those days were either done for uh, celebrations such as Independence Day, was a big event, but bigger than Independence Day in those days were the Italian feasts, the
Hmm.
saints, the feasts of the various different saints, and those types of programs were not you were not hired by a committee. You were given an invitation to compete for a prize. And the only way you got paid, the only way you saw revenue is if you won the competition. And there was generally five companies, 3 to 5 companies in the competition. And so in order to survive in the business, you had to be amongst the best. You had to be amongst the top three on each time out. And thank the good Lord, my dad had the craft, the knowledge, the artistic talent, the know-how to win these types of competitions. And as a result, he emerged as one of the leading firework companies, if not the leading firework company on Long Island, which was a pretty big feat in those days. And then
Hmm.
from there, we became a regional company, and then from a regional company into a national company, and now an international company. So the
Yes.
answer to your question was yes, it was difficult keeping a business alive and going and living off of it. You know, in the
Hmm.
early days, my dad was not just in the firework business. That was what he wanted to do. That was his dream, and that was what he dedicated his life towards. But in order to put food on the table and eat, he had to work in other jobs. He was a drummer in a band for a while. He was a laborer on road crews, building roads, and those were the types of things that he had to do in order to survive the winters. When in those days fireworks were unheard of in the winters.
Yes.
Today it's a year-round business, but in those days fireworks just were not on anybody's mind. So in order to stay alive, you had to do other become the old phrase, the jackass of all trades and the master of none.
Yes. And did he go to school through Patchogue High School and
I don't recall the school that he went to. I think the
okay.
school was a one-room classroom in the Bellport East Patchogue area. But
Okay.
his education ended at the eighth grade, which I believe was the end of the educational period in those days. It wasn't until later on that the grades exceeded from eighth to 12th and
Mhm.
then beyond. So he went to the eighth grade, got his education, and started working with his uncle, my great uncle that I was explaining to you earlier,
Mhm.
had the firework business. And when he passed, my father succeeded him in the firework business. And when my dad became a victim of Alzheimer's, my brother and I and my sister became the successors of the Grucci fireworks business. Now my brother's children, my brother's son, I should say, is the family successor in the family business.
And and then just for you, how was it for you even as a child growing up in the family business and seeing a lot of these celebrations and spectacles at a young age?
But it was fun.
Mhm.
I didn't have the appreciation for what we did then as I do now, obviously. As a small boy growing up, it was always fun to be with your family. My mom and my family's firework business was just that. It was a family business. My uncles worked for my dad. There were people that we would call uncle that was truly not a family, was not blood, but were like family. And when we were doing fireworks shows when I was a small boy on these Italian feasts, my mother used to pack a big picnic lunch.
Mhm.
She'd on if the event was on a Saturday, starting on Thursday, she'd be frying the chicken and making the meatballs and putting the
Mhm.
sandwiches together and getting the car set up and ready to go to the event. And that's
Mhm.
how we spent our youth. And as I got older, I would help my dad. I would do things that he would tell me to do, whether it was to dig a hole to put a standing set piece in, or uh, move the rack of mortar tubes from one side of the field to another. And never working with the fireworks until I was old enough and educated enough to know what to do with them. But being around the industry was always fun, and so that was my life. And I didn't think of it as anything different, anything special, anything unique. It was how my father worked. This was how my father made a living.
Mhm.
Some of my friends' fathers worked in factories. Some of them worked for uh, as mechanics, etc. My
Mhm.
father was a fireworks guy, and that's what we did.
Yes. And coming out of high school, or did you know what you wanted to do as a career? And did your father want you to continue to become a leader within the company?
Ironically enough, my parents both mother and father worked in the business. My mom took care of the office work and sometimes did some of the pyrotechnic stuff as well, while my father did all of the pyrotechnic stuff and along with the employees of the company. But knowing how hard it was and how difficult it was and how much you put into it and how little financially you got out of it in those days, they wanted their children to do something different.
Hmm.
My brother, myself, and my sister, they wanted us to go on to a professional life. They wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant, something that didn't have to work as hard as they did in order to make a living. Not that they don't work hard. I don't mean to demean their professions, but it's a different type of work. And so when I was in high school, the lore of the firework business, there was a piece of it that kept all of us involved in the fireworks business. And that was the excitement and the joy of hearing the oohs and the ahs when the program would unfold and you see your handiwork, you see your artistry come to life and bring the smiles to the faces of the little kids and the adults. That was the draw, that was the hook that kept us involved in the business, even though we had to work really hard at it. And we made a living. I'm not going to say we didn't. We did well. We didn't long for anything, but we weren't the type of a family that would take the summer off and go yachting, for example.
Hmm.
Our summers were work. And our winters were preparing for our summers. So, it became a full-time job.
Hmm.
And when I was in high school, while I was being encouraged to do other things, I always had my mind set on, and my mind was always set on being in the firework business. And I would always say, I don't need a college education because I'm going to go into my father's fireworks business. And I regret that statement today. I wish I did further my education because it would have helped me get through the trials and the tribulations that you would face in business,
Hmm.
having a better education than the school of hard knocks. So, the answer to your question is I've never had any other desire than to be in the firework business. And neither did my brother. My sister, for a short period of time, when she married a manager of a department store, and they kind of traveled from place to place, but she always had the longing to come back and be a part of the family business, and they did. He was a
Hmm.
manager in a department store called Grant's. It was
Hmm.
a large department store chain that eventually went bankrupt, and so he migrated from being in a manager of a department store to becoming a pyrotechnician in the family business. So
Hmm.
my brother-in-law and my sister both came into the business. My brother was in the business already, and I was in the business already. Neither my brother's wife or my wife followed us into the business. Their decision, and which was a joint decision between my wife and I, was that she would stay home and take care of the children and raise
Hmm.
the family while we worked. And
Yes.
not that she didn't work. I don't want to again make the
Hmm.
misstatement that being a domestic person is not work. It's harder than going out of it's harder than getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning and going to work for 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 hours. And I know that now because I'm a caregiver for my wife. My wife unfortunately came down with frontal temporal dementia. And so what she used to do for my children and myself, I find myself now doing for her, and taking care of one person is a handful. I can't imagine the stress and the workload that she was under, taking care of me especially and the two kids.
Yes.
So, our life then was easier than, from a financial standpoint, easier than our children have it today. Today,
Hmm.
you need two workforces to bring revenue into the household to survive. Then, if you had a decent job, you can provide for your family with one income stream.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, things have changed. in Long
Yes.
Island has gotten so expensive that
Yes.
the types of salaries that you make today, if we made them when I was in my working years, I would be able to take the summers off and go yachting.
Yes. Um, and then also just looking at the company, Fireworks by Grucci they've produced shows for presidential inaugurations and Olympic Games. Is there a particular show or moment that stands out most for you personally or emotionally?
But each one of the shows has their own character and their own life to it. And to ask which one is your favorite is kind of like asking a parent which one of their children is your favorite. I
Yes.
loved them all, and
Hmm.
I loved all of the programs that we did. But the ones that I can remember that stand out would be the inaugurations because there was so much more involved than just a fireworks program.
Hmm.
You were involved with the transition of government. You were involved with the celebration of freedom and liberty and democracy, and you were bringing a certain touch to all of that, and that stood out in my mind as being very worthwhile and a very important thing to do, notwithstanding the your political persuasion. I always used to kid and say Fireworks by Grucci was a nonpartisan fireworks company. We did fireworks for starting with Reagan and Bush and Clinton. We did fireworks for President Obama didn't have fireworks during his inaugural ceremonies, but then we went back to Bush and to Trump, and it didn't matter to us at that point, what your politics were. What was important was the process that was unfolding, the democracy that you were being a part of, the history that was being made, and that
Hmm.
stood out. Other
Yes.
events were kind of monumental, were World's Fairs and the Olympics. I mean, whenever you have such high profile events, it's very rewarding to be a part of it. We got to be known as the company, the family that you go to if you only have one opportunity to get it right.
Hmm.
When you celebrate a World's Fair, for that particular World's Fair, you only have one opportunity to get it right. When you do an inauguration, you only have one opportunity to get it right. And a lot of the times there were a lot of firework companies who wanted to do those events but didn't have the expertise to do them or the background in those types of mega events. We fortunately did because we crafted ourselves towards that pinnacle in the industry,
Hmm.
and we were the ones who were asked to perform. It wasn't so much a matter of bidding for the job or selling the job. We evolved into having a marquee name. And when somebody said we need fireworks, the name Grucci was the name that they thought of. And at that point, it was easy to get the event.
Hmm. Yes. Like the reputation and uh, reliability. And uh, do you feel like in the 70s, was that a turning point where you started getting even bigger events and awards?
Yeah, the '70s were a turning point. We did some things that put us on the map, so to speak. One of them was we made the at that particular time the world's largest firework device, and it captured the title in the Guinness World Book of Records as the
Hmm.
largest firework launched. We launched it over Titusville, Florida, and it captured the record, and that started to give us that recognition of being unique. We're not part of the industry. We're a leader in the industry. And
Hmm.
then we won an international competition in Monte Carlo in 1979, and we were there. George Plimpton. I don't know if you recall that name or not, but George Plimpton was a very notable writer. He was uh, uh, a writer who would experience his writings. In other words, he wrote about the Detroit Lions and he played one play for the Detroit Lions, so he can understand what's involved with that. He fought
Hmm.
a professional boxer and wrote about that, Archie Moore. And he loved fireworks. That was his passion. So he used to come out and visit my dad, and we became friends. We, the family, became friends with him over the years. And so he accompanied us to Monte Carlo for the competition, and he wrote about it when he came back for the New York Times. And all of a sudden, we became, a nationally acclaimed firework company.
Hmm.
And it was from that launching pad that other events started coming in. The decade of the 70s was difficult in the beginning. It got better towards the end. And the beginning of the 80s, with the ushering in of Ronald Reagan, the economy, for whatever reason, for whether it was his policies or just timing, took off. And
Hmm.
fireworks became a very big part of celebrations. It not only became a celebratory thing for uh, holidays and religious services, but corporations started to see the value in it. Companies like Philip Morris and Lever Brothers.
Hmm.
Uh, Lever Brothers was celebrating in the beginning of the 80s. This Lever Brothers was celebrating the 30th anniversary of Whisk laundry detergent. And one of the ways that they celebrated it was they took their product to various events throughout the country and gave them a fireworks show. In other words, they would hire us. We'd go out and seek the outdoor entertainment event. They would come and do their marketing,
Hmm.
and for the right for them to do the marketing, they would give this event a world class fireworks show. And we were the company that they wanted to use. It wasn't a matter of again bidding for it. It was a matter of who's got the experience and the know-how and the creativity, the artistry, and most importantly, the name for the draw to bring people to this event.
Hmm.
And when Lever Brothers started to do their review of the numbers, they found that instead of costing a nickel an impression, we were giving them consumer impressions for between 1 and 2 cents, which was a huge plus for them. They were
Hmm.
reaching a much bigger audience for a lot less money, is how that ultimately shook out. So other corporations saw that, and they started using us. Merit
Hmm.
Cigarette, for example. I'm not sure we would do a cigarette tour today, but then we did.
Yeah.
It was called Merit Harbor Lights, and we went to all of the various events on the water. And Philip Morris brought their product there, and they did product sampling, and we were able to bring a huge crowd the night of the fireworks show, and they were very happy. And that's how we became more and more known, from events like that. And then we did 1 or 2 events overseas that caught the eyes of those who have wealth beyond belief. You look at some of these countries, and from the oil monies that they've generated, they've got more money than they know what to do with. And
Hmm.
one of the things that they knew what to do with it was to buy fireworks shows. So
Yeah.
we became very dominant in the Middle East, for example, places like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, Dubai. All of the places that were just investing huge sums of monies into their infrastructure and trying to bring tourism and trade to their countries. They would bring us in, and we would do a program, and they would market it and again find the benefit of having a Grucci fireworks show.
Yes.
One of the things that was to our benefit, obviously, was if one of the sheiks did a $500,000 fireworks show, the one next door had to do 1 million. So it became it became like shooting ducks in a barrel, as they say.
Yeah. And then we might be jumping a bit, but in terms of, uh, you mentioned your nephew is now in charge, but in terms of the transition from your day-to-day operation of the company, how did you prepare the next generation for taking the reign?
The preparation started again when he was a young lad, and he followed his dad, my brother, onto various fireworks shows and helped, and he got bitten by the bug as well. But the transition into the business came actually as a result of a tragedy. In 1983, uh, our family experienced a fire through our plant, which led to a series of explosions, and it killed my brother, my nephew's dad,
Mhm.
and took the life of my cousin, and completely wiped out our operations. We were pretty much penniless and without the ability to create the fireworks that we used to because our plant was in ruin. It took us several years in order for us to settle out as to where we were going to be, whether we were going to stay on Long Island or move to another state. It was our decision to stay, to rebuild, and to grow our business. And my sister and I and my brother-in-law were at the helm at that point. My nephew was still in college, getting ready to graduate. And when he did, he started out in his life, working life, as a telemarketer for an investment company, which he disliked tremendously.
Mhm.
And he came back to the business, and my sister and I said, "Listen, if my brother was still alive, it would be a three-partner business. My brother is gone, and so my brother's oldest two boys became into the business, and we were going to give them shares in the business. And what ended up happening is one of his sons went on to a different life. He went on to becoming an investor, an investment person. And so my nephew Phil, who remained, took my brother's share of the business. My sister and I took care of him that way. So once he became an owner in the business and he became involved in the business, uh, his ability to learn and to pick up things was moved expeditiously. And he
Mhm.
really became an integral part of the firework business within several years, to the point where he was designing programs, executing shows on his own, taking on challenges in the computer world, bringing in the technology that we needed to keep abreast of the types of programs that we were doing.
Mhm.
And so he became a very vital part of the business. And it was just uh, that preparation for succession happened almost on its own. It almost became, an automatic progression rather than having to teach someone the business. The business was teaching him, and he was bringing his talents and expertise, so that when it came time for Donna and I, my sister Donna and I, uh, to step aside because it wasn't the business had grown and had moved technically uh, beyond what we were used to doing, and to
Mhm.
learn a whole new way of doing business at our ages just didn't seem like the thing to do. So
Mhm.
we stepped aside, we retired. My nephew took on the business, and he's moved it now to the next level, to the next uh, pinnacle in the life story of the Grucci's.
Yes. And then you mentioned in the beginning, you served as Brookhaven Town Supervisor before being elected to Congress. But
Yes.
what motivated you to step from the business role into the public service role?
I told you a few moments ago that we had a horrible accident in 1983 that led to a series of explosions. And it was a very, very difficult time for us, emotionally, financially, any kind of uh, horrific thing that could run across your life. My dad became ill with Alzheimer's. My mother suffered heart attacks. My brother was gone. My sister and I were in a state of shock. The business was in ruin. Lawsuits were piling up. And, what gave us the motivation to keep going, to keep moving forward, were the incredible letters of support that would come from not only our local community, but the community, the national community, the community that saw our work, that was part of our experiences. And we were getting letters from people. One of the big events just prior to that accident was the Brooklyn Bridge Centennial Celebration. That
Mm.
put our families' creativity and abilities front and center, and gave the world a view of what we were capable of doing. 6 months later, the pendulum swung in the other direction. But the point I was making is that letters were coming in from people in New York City saying to us, please don't get out of the business. You
Mm.
brought such joy and happiness to our lives. Others would say, we were getting married when you did the Brooklyn Bridge. It was like our own private fireworks show. It was
Mhm.
wonderful. Letters coming from across the country from events that we did, and that gave us the motivation and the emotion to continue to go forward and to rebuild the business. And we met with some obstacles. There was the very immediate, the most intimate community was suffering as a result of the damage done to their homes. Local politicians, they were wavering as to which way to go. Life became again difficult for us from a financial standpoint, and all of that worked its way out through the support of the community. And one of the things that I said during that process was, once we get ourselves back on our feet again, and once get our head above water, it's time for us to give back to the community more than just fireworks.
Mhm.
And that's when I decided to get involved in politics and government, more government than politics. But in order to be involved in government, you've got to be involved in politics.
Yes.
So, I served I'm a Republican. I served as a Republican. I was asked to serve on the Suffolk County Planning Commission by a Democratic county executive. And when I told him, I said, you have to understand I'm a Republican, and, I'm not about to change, my party affiliation. He says, I don't want you because of your party affiliation. I want you because you know how to run a business.
Mhm.
And so from that standpoint, I became a member of the Suffolk County Planning Commission. From there, now that was an appointed position. From there, I became the chairman of the Brookhaven Town Zoning Board of Appeals, which again was an appointed position. And then when a seat became available on the town board, I was asked to run for that seat, which I did, which is an elected position. And from there, I was elected as the supervisor. And from the supervisor, I was elected as the congressman.
Mm.
So the uh, movement that I had in my life from uh, the private sector to the public sector was an easier transition, because most of the positions that I served in, except for the last one, was an administrative position. Running
Mhm.
the zoning board of appeals was like a CEO of a business. Being the supervisor of the largest town in Suffolk County was like being the CEO of a large business.
Mhm.
Uh, Being a legislator in Congress was a different experience. And so as I migrated through my experience in government, I found that serving in government was both rewarding, filling, and something that everyone ought to do, whether you choose to be an elected official or just work in your local community, on a civic group or a Boy Scout group. If you can give back to the community, you can't imagine the self gratification that comes with watching your energies and your efforts being put to good use.
Yes. But making that transition from the supervisor position to the Congress, how was that process in running that campaign?
But running that campaign was obviously different. It was a larger area. When you
Mhm.
ran for supervisor, it was a townwide position. Although the town is very large, The Congressional District consisted of the five East End towns, the town of Brookhaven, and a portion of Smithtown at the time that I was in office. And so, you have to understand the needs of those various areas, and you have to address their concerns, address their needs while balancing your position out for the entire district, and keeping
Hmm.
in mind that your decisions, if you are so elected, your decisions will have a national effect as well as a regional and a local effect. So the transition from an administrator to a legislator was not an easy one for me because all of my life I've always been in an administrative position, making decisions, running the company, having employees work for me, directing the flow of things. That was my wheelhouse. Moving
Hmm.
to a legislator was completely different, and in politics, the term used to be you went from you when you're an administrator, you're the guy who catches the bombs. When you're a legislator, you're the one who throws the bombs. So I wasn't used to throwing them. I was used to catching them, and it was a difficult transition.
Hmm. But the issues that you were working on for the town level, there probably were some similar things for the first congressional district, like you said, but they're kind of broader, and then some things are for the entire country. But because our library is based on the North Fork, I think at that time you did you came out and attended the grand opening for Mitchell Park out here. But were there other things that you remember, even specifically about the North Fork?
The North Fork, as well as the South Fork, and the other East End towns had similarities in their issues. Predominantly, it was environmental issues.
Mm,
The areas were agricultural, whether the North Fork was growing grapes and starting a fledgling wine industry at the time, and Riverhead was more of a farming district.
hmm.
So environmental issues were very, very much of concern to the general public out there. So, and it kind of dovetailed to Eastern Brookhaven. Eastern Brookhaven was also more of a rural area than the suburban area, moving closer to the western boundary of Brookhaven Town. And so you're right. There was a lot to be concerned with. I was I tried to be as attentive to the needs of the people on the east end of the town, even though their population base was so much smaller than the remainder of the district, but didn't lessen their concerns, and it didn't warrant any less of a commitment on my part to them. And so I tried to do as much as I could for the East End. We did some good things. We worked with the South Fork uh, on the jetties, the problem of erosion along the coastal line. Working with the let me see, what was it? The Department of Energy, I believe it was,
Hmm.
on on projects out on the eastern end of Long Island.
Hmm.
And on the North Fork, we were working with those who were looking to get a foothold in the wine industry and
Hmm.
helping them to navigate through whatever regulations they had. And not to mention the fishermen. The fishermen were a very big part of the East End uh, monetary system and business system. And they had a really tough life. Fishing is not fishing off the coast when you cast a rod into the ocean is fun, but when you do it for a living, it is hard work, and oftentimes it is not as rewarding as you need it to be in order to continue to survive. And the thing that was
Yes.
most important on the minds of farmers and fishermen were at that time were the estate tax. You know, the estate tax was grabbing 55% of the value of a person's business if they left it to
Mm-hmm.
their children, for example. So if you were in the fishing industry and let's say you had two boats and you were out there working these two boats and you had an asset of about maybe a million and a half dollars, and you passed away, your children would be responsible for about $500,000 in taxes on that $1 million worth of assets.
Mm-hmm.
And no one in business, or I shouldn't say no one, but people like farmers and people like fishermen and people like fireworks people don't usually keep a $500,000 in cash laying around. So
Mm-hmm.
they end up having to sell their farm to pay the taxes or sell their boats in order to pay the taxes. And
Mm-hmm.
it ended their lifetime of work. And, that just didn't seem to be right here in America. So I
Mm-hmm.
worked with them to help get the estate tax uh, eliminated in our first term, and that did happen under it was George W. Bush who brought a complete new program to America, and one of the pieces of it was the elimination of the inheritance tax.
Yes.
So to answer your question in a shorter way, I tried to do as much as I could for both the North and the South Forks, as well as
Yes.
Riverhead and Shelter Island.
Yes. But just now looking at the national level, that was a particularly turbulent time right after 9/11. What were
It
some of
was.
them? Yes. What were some of the most pressing issues even on the national level, and how did that crisis shape your work in Washington?
It changed it completely. We went from a peacetime Congress to a wartime Congress, and there's much more than just words involved with that. When you serve in Congress, it's a 2-year term. And during the mid-break, which is generally July and August, you come back to the district to do your district work, to spend more time in the district than in Washington, so that you can become more in tune to what's going on. So I left Washington when we were in peace, working on things like what I just explained to you, the tax package, uh, the patient's bill of rights, educational issues, things
Hmm.
that had a more of a domestic feel to them. When I left in during the summer and then in the early fall when 9/11 hit, when I went back to Washington, it was no longer a peacetime Congress. You we were being taught how to don gas masks and respirators and shown where to go and secure yourself from harm's way if an attack came onto the either the White House or the Capitol building.
Hmm.
But the legislation changed also. That we were debating things like the Patriot Act, which
Hmm.
for some Congress people, they were dead set against it because it gave more power to the government and put people in more of a confined environment. And when it came to dealing with their Social Security numbers, for example, their some of our liberties and freedoms got curtailed because of the type of attacks we were under. And so all excuse me, all of that is what we were dealing with. And we were
Hmm.
dealing with a city that saw military people standing at various strategic spots in the town just in case there were terrorists that would want to come and do harm to this country.
Hmm.
And it was a huge change. It was. It changed me too.
Hmm.
Again, I went from focusing on the domestic issues to focusing on how do we protect our country? How do we protect our citizens? How do we make sure that what happened on 9/11 doesn't happen again? You
Hmm.
know, what kind of legislation is going to help prevent that while still keeping us free and keeping us safe?
Hmm. Yes. And I know you had the 2002 reelection race was a closely watched one in the country. What were some lessons that you took from that experience, political or personal?
Well, that was a difficult race. It was difficult in the sense that it turned into the most negative run campaign on both sides, not only for that cycle, but some of the pundits were calling it the most negative campaign that they've ever seen. And so one of the takeaways that I had from that was, you know, the argument always is from the pollsters and the public uh, people in public is
Hmm.
that negative campaigns work. If you tear down your opponent, then you have a better chance of winning. I think it's probably the opposite now. I think if you espouse your virtues, what it is that you want to do, how do you plan on doing it? Give the people a reason to vote for you, not a reason not to vote for the other person. I think that will foster a much better environment in politics, especially today.
Hmm.
Today, politics is a blood sport. I mean, it's not just enough to beat your opponent, but you got to destroy them.
Hmm.
You got to beat down the party. You got to put people in jail. You got to go after their families. I mean, that's not the politics. That's not the government that I wanted to be a part of. But
Yes.
unfortunately, issues some I created, some my opponent created, uh, kind of drove the process. And so the takeaways that I have, the things that I would do differently if I ever had the opportunity, which I don't expect to ever have again, the opportunity to run for office would be to be more open and more transparent about what it is that you're going to do for somebody.
Hmm.
You're more interested in what I'm going to do for you rather than what the other guy has done it against you. You
Hmm.
know, you already
Yes.
know what that may be. What you want to know is what is it that I'm going to do for you to change that and make your life a better place. And if you can get that message across, you'll win elections.
Yes. Then just moving to today, looking at Suffolk County today, what are some of the most significant changes you've witnessed since your time in office, and what worries or encourages you about the future?
But the issues that are confronting I'm sorry, Suffolk County today is not much different than what they were when I was in office.
Hmm.
The I believe the most pressing issue that's facing both Nassau, Suffolk, New York, and probably the country is the cost of living. It's taking a medium family, the medium family income is probably grown to about 70, $80,000 a year today. But to live on Long Island, you need over $120,000 a year to live. So what does that mean? That means that those families who are earning a good wage, I mean, earning a good living, are living in substandard housing or their parents' basements. They're trying to put money aside for their children's education, or if they're at all lucky, they can put a few dollars away and take their family on a trip somewhere.
Hmm.
That's the most pressing issue is the cost of housing, the cost of food, and the cost of energy here on Long Island. And they were big issues when I was there, but the impact that it had on the constituency when I was there was lesser than it is today. Today, the impact is truly great. And as a result of that, we're losing our talent. We're losing our young, brightest minds, our hardest workers, our innovators, our creators to areas of the country where they can survive
Hmm.
without working two, three jobs in order just to make ends meet. And that's a pressing issue then, it's a pressing issue today. And environment will always be an issue on Long Island because our water source, our fresh water drinking, only
Hmm.
comes from one place. It comes from our aquifer. It's not
Hmm.
like we pipe the water in from other places upstate like New York City does. We get our water from the ground we stand on. So if we damage it, we damage our water supply, we damage our future.
Hmm.
And that will always be a pressing issue. It was pressing then and it's pressing now.
Definitely. No, it seems like maybe some things have accelerated, and probably even since COVID too, we've had some of the problems have increased more. But just looking at your career, you've worked both in the public and private sectors at high levels. How do you compare the responsibilities and pressures of each?
Well, they both have their pressures.
Hmm.
They're different in one sense, but they're the same in another. They're different, meaning that the source of the stress is different. In business,
Hmm.
you worry about where your next client's going to come from, the supply chain that you have to put in place in order to get your inventory in place. You got to worry about your workforce. Those are very stressful things. Making your payments on time, paying your bills on time, keeping your credit up. They bring with it a host of stress levels. In government, you don't necessarily worry about that. What you worry about is the things that I was just discussing. You worry about how do you make the quality of life better for the people around you. In the town, local government doesn't deal with the same kinds of issues that you deal with at a national level. For example, national level, some of the more stressful issues, I guess you could say, or would be things like abortion, would be things like war, things like energy levels, energy dependence, international policy. Those are the things that would be stressing you out at a higher level than local government. Local government, you're worrying about picking up people's garbage, making sure that the garbage trucks are there on time, that you don't have a strike and you don't have you're able to provide the services that people have grown to expect from local government, not just picking up garbage, but they want clean parks, they want safe neighborhoods.
Hmm.
These are the things that drive the stress levels at you at a governmental level. So
Hmm.
while the stress is still there, and you feel it, what's causing that stress is it's coming from different sources. But the level of stress is, I would say, about the same being in government and being in business.
Hmm.
Just it comes at you in different ways.
Yes. And just looking to the future, you mentioned that I think it is challenging for the younger generation, and some of them are moving away out of Suffolk County. But if you could pass on one piece of advice to young people in Suffolk County who want to get involved and serve their community like you have, what would it be?
But if you want to serve your community, be a good neighbor. That's where it'll
Hmm.
start. Take care of your own community, your own neighborhood. Make sure that that your neighborhood is safe and safe
Hmm.
from the standpoint of if children are playing, keep an eye on them. But if you want to get further involved, there are opportunities for you to do that volunteering. You can either volunteer in a service group, things like a Lions Club, a Rotary Club, or a civic organization. They do marvelous things in the community that are in much need of people with talent and dedication and commitment. And then again, if you want to go on to to a more higher level, there's always political office that you can seek. Uh, it takes a lot of energy. It'll take money, and it'll not your own money necessarily, but money in order to run campaigns. And so you'll have to learn all of that. But you can do some wonderful things at a local level
Hmm.
without getting involved in an elected office. When I worked on the then Brookhaven Memorial Hospital Board of Directors, that was a volunteer position. There was no remuneration for it. You put your heart and soul into it because it benefited the community. That gave me a great deal of personal satisfaction,
Hmm.
as much as any of the other things that I've done. And it just didn't take as much of a commitment as an elected official would take, for example. That's a job. And if you want a career in politics or a career in government, there are opportunities for you to get that. But my advice and my encouragement to the next generation is understand what you want to do. Be true to your own feelings and stand for what you believe in. If you
Hmm.
stand for what you believe in and are not swayed by poll numbers, for example, or the latest blip on the nightly news, or the loudest voice or the squeakiest wheel, if you know what's right and you know what's wrong and you stand for what's right, regardless of what everybody else is doing, stay true to your commitments, and you'll be doing the best you can for your community.
Yes, absolutely. And then I think just lastly, I'd like to ask at the end if there was anything else you'd like to say or discuss that we haven't touched on.
I think we did a lot. We covered a lot of
we,
territory.
yeah, we covered a lot.
I
Uh,
would like to say thank you for this opportunity. I mean, whenever you give an old Paul an opportunity to speak to the public, you never know where they're going to go. So, but thank you for the opportunity.
no, definitely. I want to thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast and share your story and your family's business and all the work you've done for the community. It was a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much. And I'll be happy to reconvene with you at any time.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 184 with Felix Grucci Jr. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.